Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to 30 on Thursdays, our bi-weekly SharePoint webinar series. Today we're going to talk about user adoption, get into some logistics before we jump into today's topic. My PowerPoint doesn't crash. There we go. So some quick housekeeping. As I mentioned, this is a bi-weekly 30-minute webinar series that we've been doing going on about 2.5 years, and we cover all aspects of SharePoint and SharePoint-related topics. Today, of course, we're covering user adoption. In 2 weeks, on September 12th, we're going to talk about and do a little bit of a case study of how you can use tools from Nintex and Cosign Digital Signatures to do onboarding with SharePoint. And you can get the full schedule of all of our upcoming webinars at sharepoint.protiviti.com. Today's session is being recorded, so if you have to leave early, you can get the full session. It'll be available on our website either by the end of the day today or early tomorrow. And there's a complete archive of past sessions, so if you've missed any of our previous sessions, they're available out at sharepoint.protiviti.com/archive-webinars. And if you have any questions while Maggie's giving the presentation today, go ahead and use the question window. It's usually on the right-hand side of your screen. Go ahead and type that in there. I'll moderate all the questions, and we'll give them to Maggie at the end of the session today. If you're into learning SharePoint online, we have a whole bunch of online classes that we've been doing over the course of the last year or so, covering all topics from SharePoint 2013 to responsive design to developer material. And you can get those on our website as well at sharepoint.protiviti.com. So again, today's session is user adoption. This time it's personal. Our presenter is Maggie Swearingen from Protiviti, and I am Steve Witt, also from Protiviti, and I will be the moderator today. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started, and I will turn control over to Maggie.
Thank you, Steve. Now let me share my screen here with everyone. Second.
All right, there you go.
So one of the big questions that comes up with user adoption is, what the heck even is it? And I think user adoption is a lot of things. And when I prepare to talk to clients about user adoption, I like to go in with some sort of definition. The problem is, if you Google user adoption and user adoption strategies, you come up with all sorts of fancy presentations from SlideShare, but none of them actually has a halfway decent definition in it of what user adoption is. So I went ahead and made up my own. I really consider user adoption the planning, development, and management of processes aimed at changing organizational behavior, often with regard to the dissemination of new information technologies. A lot of people use the phrases user adoption strategy and change management interchangeably. I certainly think with regard to adopting a new technology in an organizational setting that's probably a reasonable thing to do. So what is user adoption? Well, it's change management. And to that end, user adoption has to come from the top. The only successful user adoption campaigns I have seen start with the executives. You have to have your executive team believing in the new technology and the way it can transform your work and the way it can transform your organization. That, for a lot of organizations, is a showstopper, believe it or not, because there are a lot of members of an executive team who, while they think that a new way of doing things is fine for everyone else, they don't feel compelled to change the way they're doing things. And that happens a lot. I've seen it with a lot of our clients, and it's a real roadblock to actually getting user adoption. The organizations who are most successful at this have at least one, if not more than one, executive champion. And it's those organizations that filter the user adoption from the top down that make it the most effective. Any project that you work on that has to do with information technology is going to cost you money. And it's a darn shame if all the money that you spent on that project or on that product goes to no good. User adoption is your return on investment. And very often I get questions, well, how do we benchmark? How do we benchmark that this is worth it? Well, you can start once you're implementing the new technology and set some metrics and some benchmarks so that you can see over time the adoption patterns. And I think that that's a very good way to monetize something that ordinarily is very challenging to monetize. It's behavior change. And this is really the crux of user adoption, and it's also why if there was a magic pill for user adoption, we would all buy it, because it's really, really hard to convince people that they should change the way they're doing something. And the only way to do that is to make it personal. And to convince them that by changing what they're doing, they're going to be more effective and more efficient in their job, and thereby hopefully be more successful and, you know, dare I say it, move up the ranks, get promoted, and see the money, so to speak. I mean, a lot of times those are the types of things that speak to people, and that's the level of personalization that you have to get to make user adoption really happen. You know, you talk about somebody who's quitting smoking, for example. Very often you run into people who won't quit smoking until someone close to them dies of lung cancer, and then they decide to quit smoking. So behavior change has to be personal to get it to happen, and that's what user adoption is all about. If you can manage to put these three things together, you will have a successful project. But user adoption, to me, equals project success. I've worked, unfortunately, on a great many projects where we've put in place beautiful websites, gorgeous creative design, fantastic functionality, and they sit there empty and quiet. Well, yeah, we finished the project and we went off our merry way, but to me, that's not a successful project. Yes, technically it was a success because it was completed, but if we have a beautiful empty website or people not using it properly, then that's not success. So when you're working on your goals for your project and your business objectives for your project, user adoption in many cases should equal project success. So, okay, great. How do we get user adoption? Well, it's actually not too challenging, but you do have to really focus on your users and understand them. And I don't just mean doing a bunch of user surveys and figuring out what people want. We're going to talk a little bit about that in a minute, and yes, it is important. But I mean really getting to know the types of users you have in your organization. This model here is a pretty standard model. A lot of user adoption researchers, you know, refer to this model. You have your first 2.5%, your innovators. You know, well, what are the characteristics of innovators? Currently, they tend to be younger and or people who can afford the capital to try new technologies. That, I'm sure, over time will change a little bit, but right now, kind of that's the model. In an organization setting, they're probably the young new hires right out of college, you know, who don't even know what life without Facebook is like. You know, they're the people willing to try things because for them, failing at something is not going to be catastrophic for their career. you know, they can make mistakes, and they're willing to make mistakes if they make 3 mistakes, but the 4th thing they try really changes things. That's a group that we want for our user adoption strategy, but it's also a group that we're going to get no matter what. So in my mind, they're not your initial focus. Early adopters kind of follow after that group. They share a lot of the same characteristics as the innovators group. They don't tend to be quite as ready to try new things. They need a little bit more convincing. But one thing about early adopters is they tend to be pretty technologically savvy. So they're the type of people that, that we can use to become evangelists for our project and for our product. In my mind, it's the early and late majority, though, that we really, really want to focus on here, especially the early majority and the late part of the early adopters, because those are people who are going to catch on to the technology pretty easily. They're going to understand conceptually what you're trying to accomplish with the technology and the efficiencies it can make happen in your office, but they're also not going to probably be averse to it. Their threshold for pain, so to speak, will be a little bit higher, which is a really, really good thing, because as we all know, when you're rolling out new technologies or a new intranet in your office, there's going to be some hiccups and there's going to be some bumps in the road. And we don't want people to get turned off by that so quickly. These groups won't get turned off so quickly. They'll be a little bit more patient than you, for you. The laggards. I'm not going to say we're not going to pay attention to them, because in many cases, if you can bring those people over to the dark side, then you have really, really implemented a successful user adoption strategy. But when you're starting your strategy and when you're planning for your strategy, you don't want to plan for that 16%. You want to plan for the bulk of your audience. That 16% will eventually come. But we don't want to create our plan around them. So what should our plan consist of? Well, I'm a big believer in every audience requiring some subtly different strategies for adoption. And these strategies can tend to absorb each other and be nested into one another, but they build on each other. Early adopters. Early adopters are really the type of people who you want to be your beta testers. Like I said, they're people who have a higher threshold for pain. They understand that technology doesn't work perfectly all the time, but they're really patient if they get that, oops, something went wrong message on the site. They're willing to press refresh or to press the back button or close their browser out and open it up again, and they're not going to stomp out and say, I'm never going to use this site again. Giving early adopters a sandbox or letting them become your beta testers can be a really, really effective strategy for getting their buy-in and teaching them very early on to use the site. As I mentioned earlier, executive support is key. Executives need to be in this early adopter group, I believe, whether they want to be or not. They're the one subset of an audience that you really want to be working with you and managing the change from the outset. I was working with a client once, and I really loved their roadshow strategy. So they had identified users in every office around the country, and they had, a manageable number of offices. We're not talking about 500 offices here or anything, but they had a manageable number of offices. They had identified early adopters in every audience, and they reached out to all those early adopters, and they invited them to a lunch. And at the lunch, it was really simple. They fed them, yay, and they also gave them a really nice demo, and they got that group really excited about the software, and they called it their roadshow. And then a few weeks later, they circled back with training and things like that. But what was really effective with that was, the team who was planning the user adoption strategy, they left. They had to go on to the next roadshow. But the group who was there for the demonstration went out into their office and said, hey, we just saw a demo of the new intranet. It's really cool. There's something new we can do. And they started even just talking about it and building excitement for it. It was a very, very small thing, but it had a huge impact. Early adopters also will tend to appreciate web-based training more than some of your other groups. Early adopters are the type of people who want to try something, and if they try it 3 times and can't figure it out, they go to Google and watch a YouTube video, and they're adept at doing that, and they're comfortable with doing that. While hands-on training for all groups is useful, your early adopters, you're going to have to worry less about. They're the type of people who you could do a WebEx and record the WebEx, and they could come back to it and watch it later on and start to understand. And that's going to be really powerful too, because they're going to be very valuable for you if you have a train-the-trainer model. The early majority. So the early majority tends to get into the people who are wondering, well, what's in it for me? I need to know that this is going to help me, because if it's not going to help me, I'm not going to waste my time. Those are the people who you want to sit down with and say, hey, Joe, I know that you manage the contract process, and I know that you print out a contract and you take it to Frank for a signature, and he takes it to Susan, and then they circle back and they bring it to the executive assistant, and she makes 4 copies of it and saves 3 PDFs to the site, and then you all get on the phone and talk about it. And what if I told you that I could make that process easier and more efficient using our new intranet? And then if you present it like that, you usually get a, well, tell me more. Sometimes you don't, but usually you do. If you can go to a person and present to them a real-to-life scenario and take a process that you happen to know is painful for them and streamline it using the technology, whether that means you build in workflow, whether that means you teach them more about the efficiencies of content types and document libraries, it doesn't matter what it is. But if you take a process that they're doing and make it simpler using the technology, they will begin to buy in. This group also strongly benefits from classroom training. They're people who get technology pretty quickly, but like that hands-on personal interaction. They like the opportunity to say, well, here's my specific problem. Can you help me work that out? That's going to be very, very effective for you and your user adoption strategy. And then finally, we have our late majority people. And the first thing that these people need to hear are successes. They need to hear them from every corner of the universe, because if they don't hear that other people in the organization are having success with this process, then they're not going to buy into it. So your early adopters, this is when you call on them for help. We need them to put together their exemplar stories and promote them to the late majority. I can't tell you how many times I've been helping clients prepare user adoption strategies or preparing them in my own organization. And by the time we get to this point, people are so sick of hearing me talk that they tune me out. And that's when you need to turn to other evangelists in your organization and have them start doing the talking for you. Because you've gotten to the point where enough people are buying into this that no one is listening to you anymore. They need to listen to everyone else. Putting together easy first steps. This group responds fantastically to here are the 3 things you do the first time you log into the site. Go update your profile and upload a picture. Go blah, 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 and go blah, blah, blah. Something that makes them feel like they accomplished something, but 3 steps or 5 steps that aren't overwhelming by any stretch of the imagination. that helps this late majority group understand that this is not, they don't have to be rocket scientists to use your new website or to use your new intranet. They can handle it, but it also lets them dip their toe into the water. One-on-one training. There's a client that I worked with who unfortunately had a very poor technology implementation prior to our team working with them. And they were very, very gun shy. But they had also learned something really, really important about themselves as an organization, which is to say that their users, none of them, responded to video training or group training. They had to be trained one-on-one, individually, for them to really buy in. They needed a trainer's undivided attention for 2 hours to really think that they could do it and that they could use the technology. That was really, really valuable information going into what could have been a catastrophic training month had we not known that ahead of time, because we completely rearranged their training schedule to meet the needs of their users. And instead of doing some of the typical training activities that we as a company would ordinarily do, we took all their hours, dumped them into a bucket and said, all right, one-on-one training. Here's how many hours we have. We're going to set up a training schedule. People are going to sign up for sessions. And if they sign up and miss their session, tough. So we really revised and molded our typical plan to meet this group's needs, because to be really, really honest, their entire model of user fell into the characteristics of a late majority. And so that's one reason why you truly have to understand your users as you're building your strategy. Back in the spring, we went to a bunch of our clients and organizations, and we also went outside of our client base, and we basically sent a survey out on SurveyMonkey, on LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter and personal connections and everything else, and said, hey, if you have an intranet, could you please just fill out this survey? Tell us what would make you use your intranet. A lot of what came back was surprising because it was feature sets. And to me, that was a little bit surprising. I was expecting to hear, oh, I didn't get enough training, or oh, well, we just we don't use it because we use Blackboard, or whatever else. It turned out that people felt generally that they received enough training, and most of them appreciated the type of training that they got. And in general, we even saw a lot of comments that said, I shouldn't have to be trained. It's a website. If I can't figure it out, then there was a problem with the way it was designed. So, we got a lot of that. But what we did get were a lot of features that people thought that their sites would benefit from and that would actually make them use their site more frequently. I'm going to skip down to what I think is probably one of the most powerful directories. I cannot tell you how many times I walk into a client getting ready to do a new intranet project, and the first thing that they say is, oh yeah, people use our intranet. They look up people on it. So, okay, great. Do they find the people? No, not always, because our information's out of date. Okay. Well, if that's the #1 reason people come to your intranet, then you really, really better focus your energies on getting that information up to date and making that visit valuable for those users. Because I promise you, your user adoption strategy is going to fail if the reasons your users come to the website aren't fulfilled. So if I am not inclined to do anything else on my intranet but look up a person, and I look them up and their information is bad, I'm not coming back. And I don't care how many webinars you host that encourage me to. So I think that's really, really important. And it's important with any feature. You can implement a whole host of features. You can unveil the Cadillac of intranets. But unless they're functioning and accurate and the content in them is good, people are not going to come back. The number 2 thing I hear is that I'll come back when search works. Search doesn't work. Yeah, our search doesn't work. Our search sucks. You know what? Your search actually probably does work. Your content is probably out of date. Or maybe you're not managing your metadata properly. Now, I have gone into clients where literally their search doesn't work. You get like a 404 error or something. But in most cases, what people actually mean when they say our search doesn't work is that they mean I don't get the results I was expecting to get. When I search for X, I get the 2006 Bowl-a-thon pictures. But that's not what I was looking for. I was looking for a deliverable from the X team. Well, why are the 2006 Bowl-a-thon pictures on your site to begin with? Or if they need to be, perhaps they shouldn't be getting so much prominence and so much metadata. So a lot of times when people say that search doesn't work, it's because we don't have a concise content governance plan that is giving us abilities and the necessary tools to archive our information properly and make sure that our content in the site is the most relevant content available when somebody searches for something. And that's really, really important. And these are underlying things that if they're not in place when you launch, even if you have a really, really good plan and strategy for user adoption, you're probably not ultimately going to be very, very successful. So user adoption is far deeper than 5 easy steps. But if I had to consolidate it to 5 easy steps, I would say that the first thing you want to do is define your business goals. I mean, why do we even want people to adopt this? Why do we care? If you don't know that when you're going out selling it and evangelizing it, then you're not going to get other people to buy into it. Define your target audience and formalize your communication plans aimed at those audiences. Think about their strengths, but also think about their weaknesses. Think about what they do in their jobs. Remember, this has to be personalized. Otherwise, it's not going to be as effective. Make sure you know who your cheerleaders are or your evangelists. They're going to be really important to you. Make sure you reward them through the process because a lot of times they're going to find some reward in this themselves because it'll make them more efficient, hopefully. But many times they're doing something above and beyond as a favor, and it's really good to recognize those people. Define your content governance plan. If you don't have one, if you don't have solid content governance, then you could have all the technology in the world, and people probably aren't going to keep coming back to your site. And then you're going to revise and manage your change. No content management strategy, no user adoption strategy is good the first time around. And you're going to learn things about your users and your organization that you're going to need to use to continually manage the process. So it's important to understand that this is living and breathing and cyclical. And as you implement it, it's part of the management and part of the buy-in process. Questions?
Great, thanks, Maggie. Yeah, there's at least one question. We'll leave it open for questions for a little bit here. So the first question is, when it comes to training, I have a number of users who want training environments to play with, in addition to videos, quizzes, and documents. Is there a good way to spin up these workshop-type areas for the trainees?
Sure. I mean, not everybody can just go ahead and create, individual site collections for trainees and let them play around in their own sandbox environments and then blow them all up when you're ready to launch the site. One thing we recommend to clients a lot, and this is particularly with regard to SharePoint, but I could see it being relevant in using other softwares, we a lot of times recommend to people go to the Office 365 site and sign up for the free 30-day trial. Because then you kind of have your own 30-day sandbox, and for a lot of people 30 days is enough. Yeah, it's not like the be-all, end-all of functionality in many cases, but it's a nice, free, easy thing to do that users can basically do themselves, and it takes the onus off of you for setting it up technically for them.
No, that was great. Next one is, do you have tips for getting executive support?
Begging? No, this is a webinar. This is a webinar, so nobody can laugh. You know, for me, executive support often comes down to the bottom line. When you present to an executive team exactly how much money they're spending on some of these initiatives, they tend to understand why it's so important. Also, I really find that, you know, speaking enthusiastically and passionately about what you're doing and caring about the project goes a long way. It sounds really silly, but you'll find that people tend to get excited when they hear that other people are excited about things that they're working on. And you tend to find support in surprising places if you have bought into your own project.
Great. Next question is, what are the best ideas for getting buy-in to the monthly webinars? This user doesn't get the number of people they want to attend. How do you help drive attendance if you're doing webinars to help drive adoption?
Well, one thing I think about attendance that's important to recognize is attendance doesn't always have to be live. From a lot of us, we record our webinars, and you know there might be only X number of people on this right now, but it'll be important for us as an organization to go back and look and see how many times it's downloaded, you know, in the next month or two. A lot of times you may not get the attendance up front because it's during the business day and people don't have time or they're wrapped up in other things, but you may get the attendance on the back end, which is something that's important to look at. The other thing I think a lot of organizations do, quite frankly, is they have too many of these things. And so we just, as employees, in many cases in billable situations, we don't have time to be doing a webinar every week or even every month because we have other priorities and we have to do our jobs. And so I think that's part of the expectation that's very challenging, but it's also something to consider. You know, sometimes less is more in many cases.
Gotcha. And the next two questions, I'm going to lump them together because they're asking essentially the same thing, which is, after the initial rollout, what is the best training approach for new hires? Or how do you get other people caught up if they come in midstream? So, you know, you start with a strategy of getting people engaged and you get your early adopters and early majority and things like that. But how do you deal with new people coming into that?
It really needs to be the centerpiece of your new hire training. For us as an organization, we found that it's very effective to actually use our sites in the training process. So, you know, we don't have users filling out paperwork, and we aren't handing out handouts. We're saying you go to the intranet, for example, and download or e-sign these documents and upload them back to the site. Don't email them to me because I won't get them. So if you build it into your training process, it tends to be more successful. Rather than just talking about it, here's our intranet, take a look at it when you have time.
Right, and that's a great plug and segue into our next 30 on Thursday in 2 weeks on September 12th, where I'll be talking about employee onboarding using SharePoint and digital signatures and things like that. So with that, we're about 5 minutes over our time limit, so that'll wrap up. I think you answered all the questions that were out there, Maggie, but if anybody does have questions, if you want to go back to that previous slide, your contact information is on there as well as mine. And we'll talk to everybody in 2 weeks. And Maggie, thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks.